Good morning or afternoon.
Hey, Eddie. I think we're still waiting for a few people, but Emma, in the meantime, do you want to switch to our PowerPoint? Great, thanks. And you can advance to the agenda slide. Thank you. All right, why don't we get started? I'm sure others will join us momentarily. Welcome to the meeting of the Climate Justice Working Group. We have a lot going on today. So we're going to get started, go through a welcome and roll call. We have a discussion with some members of the Transportation Advisory Panel and the Land Use and Local Government Advisory Panel. And then we're going to get into discussion of the evaluation rubric that we're working on putting together and the draft indicator list that we put together based on our last few meetings and all the indicators we've been talking about. Emma, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And Commissioner Sagos, if you're on and want to say a few words.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for signing on today. I hope you're all doing well. And just to thank you for your continued work. I know you're taking time out of your day away from your regular jobs to do this, but it's obviously, as we all know, very important work. And the integration of what you're working on with disadvantaged communities and the work of the panels is really important. If you log into the CAC discussions or any of the panel discussions, there's always Q&A about what the Climate Justice Working Group is doing, what it's up to, what the status is. We field a number of questions about it. So the work is really important, and the merger of the groups today, first merger with these two panels you're going to hear from, and they're going to hear from you, is an outgrowth of that. So I'm hoping today's discussion will be an active one, and we get closer to that really important, ultimately that definition, and then really to the work of the CAC and the scoping plan that will be in front of us to consider. So thanks again. I hope you all are safe and your families are safe, and you're ready for the next few months. So back to you, Rosa.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. And Emma, if you can go to the next slide, please. We'll get started today with our conversation with the advisory panels. As the Commissioner said, it's an important part to have the advisory panels and the Climate Justice Working Group engaging. I think it'll be best, because this is early engagement, if we give a bit of an overview of what the working group is doing and what the advisory panels are tasked with doing, and a little bit of an update of where we are in that process. But first, let's get into a roll call, and I'm going to first go through the working group members. Do we have Eddie Bautista?
Presente. Good afternoon, folks.
Thank you. And Donathan, are you on?
Donathan's here.
Jared?
I am here. Good afternoon, everyone.
And Amy? Okay, and Elizabeth?
Buenos días. Elizabeth.
Hi. Abigail?
I'm here.
And Mary Beth? Okay, Sonal?
Present.
Hi. Rawa?
Good morning, I'm here.
Hi. And turning over to the state agencies, Chris Cole?
Hi, I'm here. Good afternoon.
And Neil?
Yep. Hi, good afternoon.
How are you? And finally, Joe, are you on?
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Great, thank you all. We also have today myself, Rosa Mendez. We have assisting us today from DEC, Alana and Emma. Thank you very much for your help with the presentations today. We also have from Illume joining us today and later for conversation, Amanda and Alex. Okay, and let's do some introductions from the advisory panels who are here with us today. I think from transportation, we have Jared Snyder. Jared, do you want to introduce whoever else is with you from the transportation panel?
Sure. And good afternoon, everyone. Looking forward to the conversation. So with me today in this discussion is panel members Nick Cifuentes, Renee Reynolds, and Paul Allen. But I believe other members of the panel are probably listening in as well. They're just not panelists for this conversation.
Great, thank you, Jared. And we also have the land use and local government panel with us today. Sarah, do you want to, Sarah Crowd, let us know who else is joining us from that panel?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, and thank you all for having us here. This is, we're very eager. These are issues of environmental justice and climate justice that come up frequently in our panel, so we're really looking forward to kicking off the partnership here. I have with me, we have four members of our panel who have joined us. believe as participants on this call. We have Geeta Nadan. I am not sure. I don't see her name, so she may not be on yet. We also have Juan Camilo Osario and Kathy Mosier and Mark Lowry. I would love for each of them to get to introduce themselves. Should we do that later or now?
Yeah, we'll do that later when we turn over to you guys for a quick update. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.
And I think it would help if the working group itself gave a little bit of an update of where we are. And I'll start, but working group members, please jump in. We've been meeting for the past few months, and as I'm sure the advisory panels are aware, this working group is establishing criteria to identify disadvantaged communities. And that's for a lot of purposes within the Climate Act, including the benefits piece for the 35 to 40% benefits mandate. Those criteria are being driven from within the Climate Act. It mentions socioeconomic information, which can be things like poverty or other indicators of income levels, environmental and pollution burdens, and vulnerability to climate change impacts. So those are the things that we're working through together. And over our past few meetings, we've put together a list of potential indicators for things that can help us find the criteria that we're looking for. So we have a list of that we've put together. It's a very extensive list. And we've also discussed how are we going to evaluate those indicators so that we can get to our final list of what we're going to use to identify these communities. To help us with that discussion, we took the conversation points and questions that we talked about over a few meetings and put them together in an evaluation rubric, which the working group is going to be talking about later in this meeting. Once we have that rubric finalized, we're going to use it to evaluate that compiled list of indicators. And that was admittedly a very quick summary of what we've done today. Are there any working group members who want to add to that? Okay, great. That means I did a good job with summarizing. Any questions from the advisory panel members on our process so far? Okay, great. So I'll turn it over now to Jared Snyder. Jared, would you give us an overview of the transportation panel scope and where you guys are in your process?
Certainly, Rosa, and then I'll turn it over to Nick and Renee, who to provide any additional thoughts. So we realize that that emissions from transportation are a major source of pollution in environmental justice areas, and an area where we're really interested in hearing from this group. We also know that transportation options, choice, convenience of those options are also very important, and both in urban areas and in lower income rural areas. So very much looking forward to the input. I just want to touch on really briefly some of the areas where we're focused on. One area of obvious focus is electrification. What we know is that we need to move towards large-scale electrification in order to achieve the emission reduction goals of the legislation. And that's electrification both of passenger vehicles and trucks and buses. And so we're looking at a number of policies that would support that goal. That could include mandates, could include incentives, investing in more charging infrastructure, strategies to make it more convenient for people and more affordable for people to take advantage of electric vehicles. And so we're really interested in the thoughts from this group of how to make sure that disadvantaged communities benefit from the promise of electrification. Another essential strategy is public transportation, and that includes maintaining transit, but also expanding transit, making it more convenient to users, particularly people in underserved areas, whether that's parts of our cities that maybe don't have the best service, or rural areas that may have little or no service. So that's an area that we're focusing on as well, and it sort of bleeds into our focus on smart growth. So what are some of the strategies to enable greater mobility in our communities? It may not be what we think of as typical transit, like buses and subways, but opportunities for shared services, vans, small buses, strategies like that. As I mentioned, smart growth and system optimization are areas that we're looking at, ways of reducing the number of trips that we take without limiting our mobility, and our ability to live the lives that we have. And then another area I want to mention is consideration of the role that low carbon fuels might make in hard to electrify uses. That would be things like aviation, long distance trucking, where the electrification system may not be as viable. And those lower carbon fuels could play a role in the interim as we're moving towards electrified transportation. But we also think it's really important to consider the impact of co-pollutants from those various fuels. Do they provide benefits in terms of reduced co-pollutant emissions, particularly in our urban areas? So it's really important to think about that. And then finally, we're looking at market-based policies to support these goals, and other options for funding any of the necessary strategies, and also mobilizing private investment. So we have, we're thinking about what financing tools like Green Bank are out there to, mobilize private investment in these areas. So that's a quick summary. Why don't I just see if Renee and Nick want to add anything? Renee, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think Jared gave a really good overview of all the things that we're considering. I think I would just add that, as a part of our framing, there has to be an equity consideration across all those different catchment areas that we've discussed. So as one of, I guess, two of the environmental justice groups that are part of the transportation advisory panel, that's really key and important to us, and why I think this cross conversation is important, just to get a sense of where you guys are with the indicators, because I think that could be a really good driver or guide and guiding stars, for us when we're thinking about policy evaluations, things that might be cropping up in our conversations. How do we evaluate them based on the indicators that you guys are developing? So yeah, I think that's it for now.
All right, thanks, Renee. And Nick, do you want to add anything maybe on in the transit area?
I'll echo what Renee is saying. I think she's exactly right. We're very much looking to you to provide guidance so that that can help shape the decision making that we're doing, and what we're going to come up with coming out of our panel. So I think this is a really good conversation. I'm glad we're having it now. I hope this is part of a rolling set of conversations we can continue to have, since the needs in frontline communities need to be front and center in any of the proposals we're coming up with. To add a little bit on transit, I think, the key thing we're looking for here is electrification and expansion. And so a sense of the key geographies is going to be really important moving forward. One, to make sure that electrification reaches those areas first. We all know that there are a lot of communities that have bus depots that are sited in large numbers in those communities, and that these are the places that have been most impacted by pollution. So ensuring ways to front load benefits there, I think, is critical. And then the expansion of transit into areas that are currently underserved, especially bus service, which we know we can do quickly, I think is another key area. Not just, and I'm not talking about just the city, but what can we do statewide to expand bus and paratransit and other alternative solutions in those communities first, and make sure that we don't just kind of keep on doing what has been done for a very, very long time in disenfranchising frontline communities, I think is pretty critical. So very, very much looking forward to this conversation as a starting point. Thank you.
Yep. So thanks, Nick. So Rosa, maybe any input from the working group would be welcome now, or questions that working group members might have.
Sure. And from the chat, I see Eddie Bautista.
Hey, good afternoon, folks. And I want to thank Renee and Nick for not just kicking us off, but for sliding in puns like driving and rolling. So don't think I didn't miss that, guys. Quick question. I totally get the direction or the guidance that we can, like the Climate Justice Working Group can and should be giving other committees. I have a specific question. I glanced through the PowerPoint that you guys shared with us, and thanks so much for that. I heard Jared mention it, and I'm just curious, how is the committee processing, indicators aside, there are critiques about the Transportation Climate Initiative based on actual studies that have emerged from California. There was a study in 2018 that, in fact, was probably the first study that looked at how California was handling its cap, trade, and invest system, which was incorporating transportation for the first time in 2015. The study that Manuel Pastor and others put out in 2018 found that there were actual emissions increases, and not just increases, but increases in environmental justice communities specifically. So I'm just curious, how does the committee square considering that as an option, and how has the committee talked about at least this initial study from California, what appears to be disproportionate impacts in EJ communities? And by the way, one last thing, in the PowerPoint, the Transportation and Climate Initiative is described as a cap and invest program. The EJ community has been saying this repeatedly. Please correct it. TCI is a cap, trade, and invest program, not just cap and invest. But that aside, I'm just curious, how has the committee processed what appears to be early research showing disparities for EJ communities with a transportation cap, trade, and invest system?
Hey, so Eddie, that's a great suggestion. We're really in the process of identifying experts to hear from, and are scheduling a few expert roundtables. We don't have one yet scheduled on market-based policies, financing, funding options, which could include things like the California Cap and Trade or Cap and Invest program, or a low carbon fuel standard, for example. And so those, I think your suggestion is a good one, to add someone that has evaluated the impacts on disadvantaged communities in California to any type of roundtable like that we establish.
Great, thank you, Jared. Yeah, it's just important to me that the EJ story is not just about indicators. If there are policies that already are raising questions about disparities, I just urge the panel to not just wait for indicators, but expressly look at existing research, including from the California Air Resources Board that is showing this. But thanks, Sherrod, appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely.
Great.
Can I
Thanks,
just add
Eddie.
really quickly there, Eddie?
Oh, go ahead, Nick.
It's a great point. And I agree with Jared. As soon as we do, and I'm on the panel that's looking at the market-based solutions. So as soon as we do schedule something where we're going to be looking at that with experts, I would love to have a conversation with you and Elizabeth and others to make sure that we have a pretty full sense of what the ramifications have been of similar policies, so that there's not that same flaw in design here, or if there's no way to avoid that, then it's not a policy that we consider.
Great, thanks, Nick. And Elizabeth, you were up next.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, what I was going to raise, I don't even know if it responds to this directly, but EJ is also about process. So what I would urge you to do, if we are being used as partners in decision making and making recommendations, not as a body of people that is reacting to the experts that you reach out to, is that you also reach out to us for recommendations of people who are experts in these areas, so that you're not just reaching out to California and these other jurisdictions for people who may be experts on market policies or on any of these kinds of processes, but reach out to us as well so that you can bring in the voices of our experts, of our people who have been doing work on transportation policy for so many years. Because I can tell you that years ago, I was in California meeting to talk about how to increase mass surface transit and move federal dollars away from expanding highways and to put it and to invest it in local communities. So these are not new conversations for us. We've been working on transportation justice for a long time. So please don't put us in a position of reacting to the experts that you select for us, but we want to be able to also tell you these are some of the experts you need to be consulting with. The one thing that I did want to raise is in these conversations about transportation, so please make sure that you integrate people with disabilities and the elderly, because I really think that a lot of the policies and a lot of the recommendations that we see in places like New York City, for example, that demonize people who drive, fail to acknowledge the fact that people have to share the road, and that sometimes cyclists are just as aggressive with pedestrians and big families and people who are disabled as people with cars are with them. And so there has to be room for all of us. And so please make sure that people with disabilities are also included in any work that you are proposing on transportation.
I just want to co-sign everything you said there, Elizabeth. I think that's exactly right, and I totally agree.
And Elizabeth, please send us any experts you'd like us to consult with. I know Renee provided several names already that we're reaching out to as setting up some of those expert roundtables in the next few weeks or months.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's Alana. Mary Beth had a question about co-pollutants being taken into consideration and was hoping that you guys could expand on that.
Sure. I mean, one thing we recognize is that that transportation is a very significant source of the pollution that causes public health impacts in frontline communities, and that's both cars, but even more so trucks and buses that frequent areas like ports and warehouses and the like that are in these communities. So all of those modes of transportation have emissions other than greenhouse gas emissions, and as we put together strategies that that move towards electrification or move towards other modes of clean transportation, those also have impacts on co-pollutants. And what I specified is in particular, as we think about is there a role for biofuels? An important part of that is are we seeing reductions in those co-pollutant emissions if a truck is using a biofuel instead of diesel? We know we're seeing emission reductions when that truck is converted to electricity. And I guess another co-pollutant issue is what are the source of the electricity that is powering electric vehicles. So we need to also think about this in coordination with the power generation panel. We don't want to be in a position where we're just moving the pollution from the cars and trucks to peaking power plants that might be located in the same communities. So that's another co-pollutant issue to think about. But Nick or Renee, anything to add on that?
I mean, the only piece that I would add here is, I think the fuel mix is incredibly important here, and also the pollutants that derive from just the use of tires on roads, the repaving of roads, et cetera. All that needs to be taken into consideration too. And so, for us, I think that's where the importance of shifting to alternative modes of transit is also incredibly important here.
I'll just add that, these couple first remarks or questions have definitely gotten to the crux of like the most contentious spaces that we're engaged in during the transportation, through the Transportation Advisory Panel. And they really point to some of the key things that we need to consider when we're looking at the various alternatives. When Jared talked about, biofuels, I think one of the key things that we're looking at is like, what is the supply for biofuel? Is that even a viable source to really engage in? How do we effectively analyze, this notion of like bridge fuels and things like that? Like, where are we actually making the investments that get us to the transportation future that we want to see? And what are the things that might be counter to that might be a bit of a distraction from that ultimate goal? So this is really helpful to sort of bring back to our committee to make sure that we're on the right track.
Thanks so much. I really do appreciate that answer. One of my primary concerns was certainly where is that power coming from? Generating power and in a way that's not safe for the environment, just to then switch to electric vehicles, it's really defeating your purpose. And then there's also questions about these large mass storage batteries and then the disposal of them and how will that impact the environment, because there's some really harmful materials if you get down to the elements within those batteries that could do a lot more damage to the environment in the long run than the emissions right now. So thanks. I really appreciate that answer and that you've already taken that into consideration.
Thanks. And Abigail was next.
Yeah, thanks so much. Some of the comments that just came up were a great segue to what I wanted to bring to this. But first, just thank you for being here. This is very helpful to have this interaction. So, thank you, Rosa, for setting it up. Also, thank you for sharing these slides with us in advance. Are those something we can put up on the screen and actually be referencing? I don't know if that was the intention, that PowerPoint would be shared. And I asked just because one of my questions was specifically about something that was on one of those. But Jared, I think, you mentioned that one of the questions is thinking specifically about how disadvantaged communities benefit from electrification. And I really appreciate that that is a priority. And with what was just mentioned about, the competing priorities and where investments go to get us to the clean energy future we need and want, I'm curious, I think it was on one of the slides, it said that the intention was to double the availability and accessibility of public transportation services statewide by 2035. And I'm curious how that compares with your proposed investment in EVs. So, why double and why 2035? I know in our region, our public transit system is really, quite frankly, insufficient given the need And so, again, thinking about the kind of competing priorities and where investment dollars go, why that double, that goal of doubling, and how does that compare with your projected investment in EVs?
Yeah, so I think we're too early in our work to compare sort of the magnitude of the investment required, and that doubling the transit use statewide, and I believe that's statewide outside of the New York City metro area. Doubling that use is a goal. And we will think about what policies can help us achieve that goal. It may be that we'll need to move some of the goalposts, whether it's the transit goals or the electric vehicle goals, as we do our work. And we're going to have to be mindful of the investment needs, and that's why one of the subgroups that we set up is focused on funding and financing and market-based policies. How those types of policies can support the kind of investment needs that we really see in the transportation area.
And I guess the process for those determinations about kind of the proportional degree of investment, will your panel specifically be making those decisions, or does that come out of the Climate Action Council?
That's a really good question. We don't make, the panels don't make any decisions.
The
panels are advisory. They will provide recommendations to the council, and then the council will consider those recommendations, and recommendations from the Climate Justice Working Group and the Just Transition Working Group, and make decisions sort of holistically about what policies to pursue, given all the recommendations that come in.
Okay, great. So I guess that just to be clear, I would encourage from a climate justice perspective to be, at least in the upstate regions, as you mentioned, focusing quite a bit of the priority on the public transit, and then within the electrification, the degree of focus. I was curious, buses versus individual vehicles, cars, what the intention was there, and would hope that a lot of the investment would be directed at buses and electrifying buses.
Right, but we probably need to move towards electrification of passenger cars, very extensively, and so we're definitely interested in how to make that a reality in rural areas, as well as urban areas. I mean, right now, I think it's been occurring mostly in suburban areas, where people are affluent, have garages where they can charge their vehicles, don't have to drive the long distances you do in rural areas. How can we sort of bring the promise of electric vehicles to those rural areas and urban areas as well, and make them viable for lower income New Yorkers. So any thoughts, input that representatives of this working group have will be important in that conversation.
Thank you.
Hey, Jared, there was a quick question from Rawa about if you can share your list of experts, because they want to avoid overlap with who they recommend to your panel as experts as well for your roundtables. And then we have, I think, Eddie, you're up next.
Great, thank you. I was curious if the committee, when we've been hearing, or some of us, when we've been hearing about alternative fuels for transportation, whether it's biofuels or renewable natural gas, there is a subtext to that kind of world of policy alternatives. A lot of us are really concerned about how these alternative fuels, in many ways, will depend on maintaining our dependence on fossil fuel infrastructure, gas pipelines and the like. when clearly the CLCPA is intended to move away from dependence on fossil fuel infrastructure, and of course, by extension, dependence on fossil fuels. So I'm just curious, how has the Transportation Committee grappled with, I think that part of what's complicating these conversations, industries, kind of stranded assets, overarching concern, which that has some validity to it, but the fossil fuel industry's infrastructure problems should not be the fossil fuel infrastructure industry's infrastructure solutions should not become our new problems, right? So I'm just curious, like how is the committee grappling with the fact that a lot of, maybe all of these different fossil fuel, these alternatives to fossil fuels, in fact, depend in some cases on blending with natural gas, maintaining pipeline infrastructure, and don't, have you guys thought about whether that may actually be counterintuitive to what the CPA intentions were?
So Eddie, I'd say that we're still fairly early in this process. This panel has not yet reported preliminary recommendations to the council, and so this is the kind of input we want to get as we consider the role of biofuels. So I'd say we have not come to any kind of conclusion. We haven't even scratched the surface of that question that you raise. We're going to hear from some experts next week at one of these roundtables, and then revisit that in a full panel meeting the week after. And so we'll make sure that the question you raise is part of the conversation.
No, I really appreciate that. No, the reason why I was asking was because it's on the first page of the PowerPoint slides that you guys sent over on the policies and programs to reduce carbon intensity. You guys clearly flag green hydrogen, advanced biofuels. So I was just wondering, since you guys put that on the PowerPoint, did the related conversation about fossil fuel infrastructure also get discussed? Because if it made it onto the PowerPoint, I'm assuming there was some conversation about it.
I think the PowerPoint you have is a very preliminary document. It's the scope of what we are going to look at, and as opposed to any kind of leanings towards any recommendation. So we're still in that process of evaluation, and we'll put the question you raised, Eddie, in the mix, as well as all the other. Renee or Nick, anything you want to add on any of the last couple questions?
Only to say that Eddie's raising really good points that I know we've started to touch on, but we haven't drilled down on very deeply because we haven't been able to drill down on a lot of this stuff very deeply. And so I just want to say, I'm glad we're having this conversation now, early in our thinking, because it's, hopefully going to impact all of our thinking on this. So I hope it's not frustrating to the members of the working group that a lot of our answers are, well, it's early. On the one hand, I appreciate that that's probably a little bit annoying, but on the other hand, I'm also very glad that we're doing this early in the process and not after we've spent a lot of time thinking about this and now have Eddie, Elizabeth, Abigail, others raising questions and us going, oh, wow, we didn't do that. And we've already spent months on this. So thank you. And I'm glad we're doing this when we are.
And Rosa, I guess a time check. I don't know how much time you allotted for these.
Yeah. Thanks, Jared. I think there was this one question that I think you can answer very quickly, and then we'll move on to land use. From Mary Beth asking if you had the opportunity to look at electrical grid capacity as the state moves toward electrification.
So we will be meeting with the power generation panel really on that exact topic.
Okay.
And it's something that we've certainly identified as an issue that we need to think about. So just let me, you also mentioned the question that Rawa had raised. Yeah, I certainly think we can share the list of recommendations we've received, and for experts and any other input is welcome. So we'll get that sent around. I'll get that to you, Rosa, and then you can circulate it.
Great, thanks, Jared. And now we have our delegation from the Land Use and Local Government Advisory Panel. And Sarah, if you want to kick us off with a brief overview.
Sure. And again, I'm actually glad we're following transportation, or we're on the same agenda with transportation, because there is a lot of overlap between the work that our panel will be doing and the scope of the transportation panel, especially around smart growth and sort of efficient land use patterns that promote public transit and and limit dependence on single occupancy vehicles, so that kind of thing. So it's we're actually very our panels will be sort of probably working on a lot of cross panel collaboration. Like transportation, we're of course somewhat early in the process, but have been very eager to meet with this group and get your input, because as we think about where we've been focusing on, as I said, on land use patterns and land use development, and as part of that, sort of the community engagement and involvement in determining and what that looks like. So that's one of our focus areas. We've really been thinking about sort of promoting, as I said, efficient land use, smart growth, foster expansion of energy efficient transportation. Again, very early in the process, but also promoting energy efficient development, energy efficient retrofits. A common theme across our panel, almost everything our panel is looking at is almost everything we do also relates to another panel. So on the energy efficiency side, obviously we'll be working closely with the energy efficiency and housing group, but our sort of angle is what's local government's role? How can we make sure that at the local level these recommendations can be implemented in a way that is across the state in a way that's appropriate for that area, is equitable and efficient. We're also looking at accelerating development, adoption of clean energy, that goes to both sort of policies to promote like adoption of solar on individual sites, things like that, and also appropriate siting of larger scale solar. And then across all areas, we're also focusing on building capacity at all levels, and on municipal efficiency. So municipalities, and local governments ensuring that their own facilities are as efficient or as energy efficient as possible. In addition to these sector specific goals, our panel was charged with coordinating all of the panels and sort of across all sectors, developing some recommendations related to adaptation and resilience. So we will be kicking that off with other panels, and Mark Lowry, who's on the call with me today, can speak to that a little bit more if you would like. But we'll be polling representatives from all of the different panels and from the working group. Rawa will be joining us to develop a series of recommendations about addressing sort of the changes that we know are coming, the climate change, the change we know is coming. So how do we adapt? How do we make ourselves more resilient across the state? I think I could keep going, but I'd rather sort of stop there and just say we've been acutely aware in our discussions and sort of mindful of the need to think about issues of equitable distribution of resources, ensuring that we avoid climate gentrification, displacement, that we're providing equal access to all of the benefits that will come out of this, because we do see there's economic benefit that will be accrued across the board to being proactive in addressing our climate challenges. So I think I'm going to leave it there, but I'd like to invite the members of our panel who've joined us to chime in if they would like. I think, what time is it? Let me start with Kathy Mosher, just because she actually has to hop off at 1. So Kathy, if you have anything you'd like to add or contribute before you have to leave.
Thanks, Sarah. The only thing I was going to say is I really appreciate the fact, Sarah, that you put together this roundtable with local government officials. And I wasn't sure whether or not could we invite some of this panel or the climate justice group to join that? Because I think getting that local, as Sarah knows, I've been a big proponent in getting more local government involvement, especially in our panel. And Sarah set up this roundtable, and I think that will give us a lot of great feedback from across the state about, what local government's hearing and what they want to see happen.
Yeah, I think we can certainly circulate that invitation. It's this Thursday. Great, thanks, Kathy.
Great, thanks, Sarah, for that introduction. We do have some people who. Yeah, go ahead. Anyone else from your panel?
I'd love to. We have three other panel members who are on, and I would love to give them a chance if they would like to say anything. Just a chance to add. Gita, Nadan, are you? So you're muted. Would you like to say anything or add anything? I see she's unmuted. Gita. Oops. Okay, well, let's, I'm not sure, Gita, we can't hear you. I see you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. So let's, we have Juan Camilo Osorio from Pratt is also on the line.
Thank you, Sarah. Absolutely. I first of all wanted to thank for the opportunity to join this session and learn about what you're doing and also share what we've been doing. I think that as Sarah hinted, and as you can see in the slides, all of our conversations have raised equity considerations that we're taking very seriously, and we definitely seek your support and guidance in terms of how to address them. Give you a sense of some themes that have emerged as we've had the conversations. One major theme that has evolved is, as the state seeks to reinvest in disadvantaged communities, and as the definitions or the indicators are in place to understand where they are, we've been discussing opportunities to make sure that there's direct engagement from grassroots leaders from these communities in the decision-making process. And so, one specific area on this regard has to do with the need to identify opportunities to build land use planning capacity outside of government. And so, for example, we've talked about opportunities to build on existing successful state programs like the Brownfields Opportunity Areas Program on one end, but also to specifically front load resources to implement grassroots plans that are already in place and that are coming directly from disadvantaged communities. Another quick example has to do with the need to promote models of shared ownership of land and infrastructure. On one end, to actively promote affordable housing and make sure that improvements do not result in forced displacement on one end, but also on the other, to actively protect industrial jobs and make sure that there's actually a just transition where worker-owned cooperatives and other models can actually be used for this purpose. And then just finally, we've talked a lot about how to adjust and identify equitable mechanisms to distribute funding. And so as we've had some of the conversations in thinking about how to activate regional planning, I think that one of the items that has come up and where we would love some guidance is how to help the state adjust some of the existing institutional frameworks to do that. Like, for example, one of the potential vehicles that we've discussed are the regional economic development councils. But in this particular case, as with all of them, how to make sure that they are diverse and that they have direct representation from the disadvantaged communities directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. And And finally, we have Mark Lowry is also on the line, and Mark is leading the resiliency and adaptation effort. So,
sure, I'll just talk for a moment about the adaptation aspect of this advisory panel's work. What we are interpreting as the council's direction is that the Land Use and Local Government Advisory Panel will make recommendations regarding adaptation and resilience, essentially to enhance the adaptive capacity and resilience for economy-wide for New York State, but then also to work with the various sector advisory panels to understand the adaptation and resilience considerations that are specific to the mitigation strategies they are recommending. So we're not thinking that each sector adaptation panel is going to do a vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan for all aspects of its of that sector, but when the whether it's the transportation advisory panel or energy efficiency and housing or whatever proposes a mitigation strategy, one of the things they should be thinking about are the equity, or I'm sorry, well, certainly the equity considerations, but also the adaptation and resilience considerations. How will this mitigation strategy work under future climatic conditions? Will it have untoward effects under future climatic conditions? Those kinds of things. And part of that is looking at the equity considerations of that pertain to any actions taken to mitigate the problem and the adaptation resilience problems posed by that emissions mitigation strategy. So the wording gets a little confusing, and we have begun to ask the adaptation resilience liaisons from each of the advisory panels to begin to provide some information. We're going to be meeting with those on the 10th of December and have asked them to begin to populate some slides that are intended to begin to give us some information, to at least start the conversation again about what are the adaptation resilience considerations involved with the mitigation strategies they are considering, and what are the, and as part of that, what are the equity considerations involved in mitigating effects.
thanks, Mark. I believe that's it for our panel. So thank you all very much again. I'm glad to start the discussion.
Thanks, Sarah. And I have Eddie, then Rawa, then Elizabeth, and then a question from Jared. So Eddie, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, thank you. I was really pleased to hear the kind of breadth of what the committee is looking at. I had two particular questions. One was about the other planning initiatives that have, all sorts of impacts when it comes to land uses. Juan Camilo touched on the brownfield opportunity areas. I don't know if he mentioned the waterfront revitalization programs that he may have, but I'm just curious, how is the committee processing using or looking at programs like the waterfront revitalization program to ensure that it's folding in and reflecting the changes in the CLCPA? Just to give you guys a quick example, City of New York is undergoing a citywide waterfront planning process, but what we're hearing is that they, at the conclusion of that process, may not submit that plan for review under the state's waterfront revitalization program. Sounds really counterintuitive and a lost opportunity. So if someone could just speak to how you guys are grappling for alignment between CLCPA and the existing land use programs in the state. Secondly, the issue of industrially zoned land. This was an issue that came up when we had the original governor's EJ and Just Transition Task Force. At the time, there appeared to not be a state-run database of what are the industrially zoned land parcels in New York State, which sounded kind of odd. And I think that in a recent conversation in this committee, there appears to be that people have access to, or is there mapping that's going to be done of all the industrial? Part of the reason is that, of course, a lot of from disproportionate industrial burdens. But the flip side of that is that it doesn't have to be that way. Elizabeth Jean-Pierre will, I hope, share some of Sunset Park and Uprose's experiences, but industrial zones can in fact be used not just for polluting infrastructure, but can actually be used for adaptation resiliency needs. So I'm just curious, where you guys are in terms of looking at where all the industrial zone land status are.
So on the industrial lands first, that's I guess the quick answer is we haven't seen that database yet, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist and we can't look at it. So I actually will look for it, but that's it sort of brings up the point that we've found sort of across the board, is that there's a need for good information in order to make the appropriate decisions. So having access to to data such as industrial lands is incredibly important in order to make decisions as to what is the right thing to go in the right place, and how and what tools, and giving localities and communities the tools that they need to understand and make those same decisions and participate in that decision-making process in an informed way. So I'd be interested to find it. I know there are challenges with, with getting zoning from, municipalities across the state, simply because they're all held locally and they have different levels of capacity and technology and all that. So actually, if you know who has that, I would love to get that from you later. We may have it in our office too. But and on the programmatic side, yes, again, I guess I'll say the same thing that the transportation panel did. That we are early in the process, but we are very, there are a lot of state programs, and I think I'm particularly familiar with BOA and the LWRP program because those fall into our in our department. So we are looking sort of across the board at all of the state programs that exist, and how and that provide support, and the communities relying on for planning and for for the work that they do, especially related to this to the CLCPA, and looking for. So we will be looking at them, and we will be considering and recommending ways that those programs do become, do allow, help communities advance these goals. And would love your thoughts on that too, and more on New York City when you have a chance at some point. Anyone else, anything to add on that?
I just wanted to say that, this is Juan Camilo, I just wanted to thank Eddie for the question about the waterfront revitalization program. I think that's an excellent question, and something that I would specifically love to follow up with DOS, given the fact that this is DOS has direct jurisdiction on this, on whether that could be something that we can activate specifically to what you said.
Hosan Stack, but if Rawa doesn't mind, if I can respond to some of this that's been raised.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, sis, thank you. Sarah, just in terms of tools so the community can understand, the communities have already come up with plans on how to operationalize a just transition on the industrial waterfronts. What is lacking is the resources to make sure that we are able to do that. In Sunset Park, the Green Resilient Industrial District is something that was designed by Uprose and our partners in response to what the community was saying. The industrial sector, as you know, was being repurposed to serve the privileged, for high-end needs. It was a big fight for 7 years against Industry City, in which government did not help. And we just recently won that victory. And it was not just a victory in terms of the threat to social cohesion and what that meant in terms of displacement for our community, but it was really an opportunity to engage in deep green reindustrialization. to look at the industrial waterfront and make sure the industrial waterfront is engaged in bringing in a supply chain, that we are changing procurement policies, and that we are effectively using water-dependent industrial areas to build for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. And so this is the only land, the only real estate that we have in New York City. You know, these are the significant maritime industrial areas, and they can't be turned into a playground for developers who are thinking about just deepening their pockets without thinking about the future of the region in New York City. And so this grid, which I would ask you to look carefully, how you can help is not by helping us understand. We understand. What helps is looking at land use, looking at procurement policies, looking at what the limitations are that prevent us from operationalizing a vision that really would be funded and literally birth the CLCPA. So for Sunset Park, for example, we're not just talking about renewable energy and offshore wind, we're also talking about food security and connecting New Brooklyn to upstate farmers and using the waterways, because the waterways are so important in terms of industrial uses. It really is a complex, holistic, intersectional approach to how we address the region's problems and put them on the path to a just recovery in the face of climate and climate change. And so what we would ask you to do is to look at these models where we have invested an enormous amount of time. You know, when Industry City came at us with this vision, we came at them with solutions about what an industrial waterfront of the future would look like and has to look like. So in our way, city planning and really conventional approaches to what economic development looks like. So for example, when people think about climate adaptation, they think about renewable energy and they think about things in silos. And we're really thinking about infrastructure and how do you use infrastructure to not only stimulate the local economy and the regional economy so that our people can thrive, but how do you operationalize it? So we can access grants to do planning, and we certainly have access to people like Eddie and Juan Camilo and the people that are part of our cohort of folks that make it possible for us to come out with these initiatives. But there has to be a commitment from the state to invest in frontline communities and frontline solutions to operationalize these initiatives. We just recently signed an MOU with EDC. You know, we have been fighting and building with EDC for many, many years. So that the land that they have in New York City isn't given up to developers, that they're not chasing the market, that they are creating the market. And so when we developed the grid, that's what we did. We were creating a market which is time sensitive and which is necessary right now. So we would urge you to, instead of exploring the literature that exists out there about what climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience looks like, to look locally at what is happening in the state of New York that is being led by frontline communities, that is not only innovative, but is really the path to climate justice. Our community-owned solar initiative, I think, was an example. It's a community-owned solar cooperative, and it's the first in the state of New York. These are examples of what small, frontline-led grassroots communities are doing to literally change the landscape. And so without your support, both political and economic, it becomes a challenge and it slows us down. And the one thing that we can't be right now is slowed down. So I wanted to offer that because you would be wasting time looking at what exists in different parts of the country when the solutions exist right here in New York, and they're being led by frontline leaders. So I just wanted to thank Juan Camilo and Eddie for talking about that, and I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I hear and I think you're absolutely right. And we are looking locally. And in fact, I think one thing I want to mention is, when I talk about making, helping communities understand, one of the, it's not, I think they need to understand and learn from the folks who have already, from the places where we're already seeing, where there are case studies, there are best practices. Sunset Park is actually one of those that I was looking at with some colleagues just just the other day as a model for community solar, which is I mean, and it's should be a model, not just in New York, but in the country. So I would, I guess I heard you, but I just want to, I'll leave it at saying that it would be, I think it would be helpful for our panel to actually, I mean, we want to bring in information and experiences so that to help the panel. I mean, that's part of the reason we're having the local officials roundtable, is to give the panel, you know, the opportunity to hear from people who are on the ground doing this work. And I think actually hearing directly from perhaps you or whoever you would recommend about Sunset Park as a model would be incredibly helpful, because we are looking at, I mean, there's sometimes a disconnect between the planning and the implementation, and how do we commit very quickly to translating from this is what the community wants, this is what will meet our goals, to actually doing it. So thank you, and I hope that we can.
Thank you. There has to be interagency coordination,
Yes.
And there has to be a commitment to actually putting boots on the ground and supporting local vision. So I appreciate you being open, and we'd be happy to provide you with more information. I put the link to the grid on the chat. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And we'll like to follow up.
Okay, thanks. And Rawa, you are up next.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sarah, and all of those folks presenting today. This is such a critical presentation for us, especially the work that we do at PUSH. I really just want to give so many hearts and love to everything that both Elizabeth and Eddie just shared. And I think a lot of what I have to say really is giving specific things around those same issues, as folks that are on the front lines really committed to holistic practices that aren't just looking at land and land use, but really centering the people and the planet in those communities. And that those folks that are the people that are actually coming up with the solutions. And that's exactly what our Green Development Zone is a demonstration project to show how do you work in such a holistic way and have a multi-pronged approach that is both serving people today, but also looking very far into the future. Many of the points that Juan brought up really resonated with me, and I appreciate that logic and that thinking. And so some of the things that I wanted to really bring up specifically is our local government oftentimes is an obstacle. It is incredibly difficult to do the work that we do when we don't have the level of support, or even maybe the understanding of how to do things differently from our local government. And so what that looks like, for example, is over 7,000 Buffalonians and Western New Yorkers went through a 3 or 4 year process to come up with the Green Code, which was implemented a few years ago and touted nationally and so forth, and our city government got all the credit for it. But oftentimes those are not being implemented correctly, because through the zoning and through the variances, they're able to, big developers are able to find workarounds, right? And so that's been highly problematic, even as we think about, how they're giving away the land to big developers rather than preserving them for public ownership and doing, neighborhood by neighborhood development around, not just housing and affordable housing and supportive housing, but also thinking about green space, in particular in poor, low-income communities. So that is a huge problem as we think about the heat island effect, as we think about workforce opportunities. Also, the people that are developing these are not employing or training the men and women from those communities, right? So there's no equity lens. And so what is it that the state can do to step in and say, organizations like mine already are, have a track record of having really great success, but oftentimes it is incredibly difficult, and the slowdown is so real. We have ideas that we can't implement for years and years, and who suffers but our community. The other thing I wanted to say is as HCR and other development or housing organizations within the state really need to kind of change their internal framework to look at the CLCPA and use a climate, both the equity, resilience, and adaptation strategy, and how they are funding development that is happening throughout the state. I think that's going to be really critical. And then another thing, and I'm not really sure if this really fits in, is really thinking about as we are transitioning to the clean energy economy, and I think about Western New York in particular, and going from gas to electricity, thinking about household equipment and other kinds of things, what is the plan for the old equipment? Is it just being recycled? Like, I don't know if anyone is thinking about that, but I really feel like it's such a critical issue, and I'm not really sure which advisory group is thinking about it, but I would love to know a little bit more. And then Sarah and Mark, I am so sorry, but I am not available on December 10th, and I hope that you guys can invite me at another time. I would certainly move what I already had planned if it weren't such a critical piece that I'm leading. So sorry about that, and I'll send you an email with maybe some alternate dates and times. And thank you for the invitation.
Well, darn, on December 10th, but we will, and your feedback and input will be valuable. So we'll make sure that you can make the next ones. But agreed, all I can say is agreed. We do need a holistic approach. I think, I mentioned Sunset Park, the Bush Buffalo Green Development Zone is another model that we've looked at and will continue to look at. Would love to have you join us maybe to talk about it a little bit, but we, again, early in the process, we don't have solutions, but we need to, and I think it's important. Thank you for sort of emphasizing the importance of addressing that sort of disconnect again between what we need to do and then actually doing it in an efficient way, and closing the loopholes that sort of have allowed sometimes development, despite our best efforts and our desire for smart growth and compact development, all this, allowing things like, allowing development and interests who have the resources that they need to push through the process and sort of undermine. So there's the slowdown and also sort of the act of undermining. Both of those things are things we need to think about and address. I can't promise, of course, that we'll be able to solve all the problems tomorrow, but these are really important things for us to keep in mind as we move forward, and would love to continue to engage with you all, and also the Just Transition Working Group, because that is something else that that's related. I'm very. I think it's really positive that both of that there's a climate justice working group and a just transition working group, so that we really are focusing on these things, or being forced to, and having folks who can help us focus on these issues as we move forward. Because our role really is, in our panel, we really do need to think holistically. We need to look at the opportunities and making sure that they're available to everyone, and that they come up from the community, that the community has a voice. Does anyone invite other panel members as well? I don't want it to monopolize. So if any of our other panel members also want to respond, please feel free.
Okay, Sarah, there's a question in the chat, and then I think we'll wrap up our advisory panel segment. Jared was asking if your panel will be providing comment on the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, which comments are due December 10th.
We will certainly be looking at it and considering it, but I don't think we won't be, as a panel, providing comments.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. Well, thank you to our two advisory panels for joining us today. I think that was a really great early engagement. And it was mentioned earlier that they hope there will be future engagements, and we're certainly trying to plan to keep the advisory panels and the Climate Justice Working Group working and engaging with each other. So thank you again for providing those updates and answering questions from our working group members. And at this point, we're gonna move on to the rest of our agenda. So feel free to stick around or log off, but thank you again for coming. So Emma, can you get us to slide 8? Great, thank you. And I think given time, we're having a little bit of adjustment to this aggressive agenda that we set for ourselves. And what I'd like to do now is ask Amanda and Alex to quickly introduce yourselves, give us a reminder, and take us through the next set of slides. I think we're going to start on slide 12. So Amanda?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Great.
Yep.
Yeah, so we've been helping the DEC with, going through the indicator list and trying to categorize the indicators a little bit. Rosa sent that out, and we also tried to draft an evaluation rubric, which would be the rules we could use to narrow down the indicator list. And we did that based on a lot of the feedback from the last meeting, as well as a lot of the language in the legislation. So Rosa did pass out a draft rubric, and we wanted to use part of today's call to really go through that rubric and try to get some feedback on it. We anticipate that we can't possibly capture all the feedback and edit live, so we anticipate that we'll capture some feedback, and then there'll be an opportunity to provide written feedback, and then we'll take another crack at it. But before we really go into that rubric, we were talking about just how to come to a shared kind of more guiding or conceptual definition on what the disadvantaged communities definition should be. And I will pass it to Alex to talk more about that idea.
Sure. And let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Alex Dunn, and I am a director at Illum, like Amanda. Just so you guys all get to know me really fast, I'll spend 2 seconds on my background. I am a psycholinguist and cognitive psychologist. Most of my work has actually been done on bilingualism and fluency and different things like that, especially Spanish and English. I am half Argentine, and so I think I needed to exercise my demons of losing a lot of fluency when we moved to the States. That focus on linguistics for me, it always makes me want to define things. So I thought that this would be a really good opening thing for us to do before we get into the rubric, because having a shared vision of what really is the definition in regular prose and words, as opposed to the definitions or the kind of more tactical components in the legislation, I think this will help us to make sure that we have this guiding kind of North Star, that then we can build the the meat of what we do to identify disadvantaged communities. So I wanted to open it up to have this discussion with you all, to just start saying, like, okay, well, in our own words, in your own words, what does a disadvantaged community mean to you? What does that really mean? In what I think we'll have is a lot of overlap, but also some pretty specific differences. And those differences, we really should get out now and start talking about through them, because as we go through the rubric and as we start looking at indicators and as we start trying to identify these communities, we need to know that now. We need to kind of start thinking and guiding that way. So Rosa, I know we're short on time, but if we can spend say 1 minute each going through and then cataloging that. We don't have to come to a consensus now. I think we don't have time for that, but I do think it's worth us just getting that out there and start talking through it before we go through the details of the rubric.
Sure, thanks, Alex. I think we can take a couple minutes to do that. And Emma, if you move to the next slide, we wanted to have a space to, again, record what everyone thinks of what is a disadvantaged community. And we, of course, have the legislation guiding us, which you'll see is built into our evaluation rubric. But if anyone wants to kick us off with how they define disadvantaged communities, and we'll be taking notes on that so we can share them and use them as part of our guiding definition. And I see in the chat that someone brought up the idea of being low income. Any others?
Yeah, this is Jared. From a North Country point of view, you know, and the territory that ANGA covers is pretty vast. It's like 38% of the state. So when I think of disadvantaged populations or households or families, I think of it through a lens of spatial distribution and just the vast geography that we have, that people who live up here have to travel across to access certain amenities and services and things like that. So that can actually be a barrier to folks up here, is just the large area that they have to travel across to get places. So it's a very detailed and nuanced piece of it, but that's how I see things.
Great, thanks. Any others? And Eddie asked for the definition from the legislation, so I'm going to drop that into the chat for consideration as well.
And by the way, the reason I said that is because a number of us on this committee and throughout all of the working groups actually worked on the legislation. So like our definition of disadvantaged communities is in the law. So I thought we would save time and just put that on in the chat and kind of work off that, because I think that attempted to capture what a lot of us meant. And by disadvantaged communities, we talked about it in the context of disproportionately environmentally burdened communities, right? So it's a nuance that's important, and it sometimes gets lost. We're not talking about disadvantages writ large. There's all kinds of, it's that overlay of disproportionate burdens and these other indicators but you'll see on the screen what we came up with.
Brilliant, thank you, Emma. I think Emma has it on the screen and Amanda dropped it into the chat as well. Do others want to add some other ideas for disadvantaged communities or highlight something from the text that's been dropped in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's Elizabeth. Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's real clear that we're talking about, well, some of us are talking about Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and that with a legacy of toxic exposure, of environmental racism, that make them particularly susceptible to recurrent extreme weather events. And so, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was flagged, because not all communities and everybody's going to be exposed to extreme weather events, but not everybody is going to be impacted the same way. And not everybody has the resources, and not everybody has the legacy of health disparities that have existed because of systemic and historical racism. So I just want to be clear that the communities that are most impacted, that least contribute to climate change, are the ones that are at the front of this definition.
Thank you. And then I see Abigail, you're next.
Thanks, Rosa. So I appreciate Eddie kind of bringing us back to the law. I think it makes a lot of sense to start there. But what I already see, kind of in what's up there is bringing us back to this question of geography, and especially with what Jared mentioned about spatial distribution. And Rosa, thank you for, kind of on a separate note, the share space, giving us that, repository for notes and for the slides, so we can kind of, be preparing for these meetings. It did help me quite a bit to go back and look at that and look at the document you shared, the New York Disadvantaged Community Definition Draft Rubric for Indicator Selection. And I saw on there that you had, I don't know if it's you specifically who wrote it, but whoever wrote it had said that per the November 16th Climate Justice Working Group meeting, the Climate Justice Work Group agreed to move forward with the criteria for a geographically based definition. And so just in terms of, this really gets us back to process questions and some of what we touched on at the very first meeting about how decisions are made. I am not categorically opposed to having it be a geographic, definition, but I do think it's a mischaracterization to say that we agreed upon that at our last meeting. And in fact, looking through the notes of the comments that I saw about it, kind of the only things I wouldn't say we had the opportunity to robustly discuss that, and we are, to some extent doing that now. So I appreciate this opportunity. But at the last meeting, Chris Cole mentioned that if we target benefits at the household level, we'll be able to reach people more efficiently than if we try to get benefits at a geographic area or census block level. So for me, this definition of disadvantaged communities, I want to make sure, my priority here is that we not lose sight of the people. And I think to the extent that we become hyper-focused on place, there is a risk of losing the focus on the people. And I say that in part because of how investment in places can spur gentrification, which drives people out of those places. So, there's a lot of overlapping concerns here, again, with, how the benefits are defined and investment is kind of allocated. But regarding process, I think it would be helpful for us to maybe revisit the question of what does it mean for this work group to make decisions, and how do we know if we've made a decision? Whether we need to check for consensus possibly, or actually take a vote. And then also, perhaps it would be helpful if we make a practice of at every meeting approving the notes or the minutes from the previous meeting to be sure that everyone is on board with, yes, we decided, or if there's anything that was kind of missed in the process, that we have an opportunity to flag that.
Great, thanks, Abigail. And I think you're right in everything you said, but I want to pull out the different threads. So I think you're right that the geographic place conversation is one that's going to be built into how we evaluate our indicators and moving forward. I also think in terms of process, you're right, we should come up with, is it going to be a simple majority vote? How do we want to handle that voting? And definitely approving the minutes from last time, because we definitely don't want to mischaracterize what the conversations are that are happening in this space. So I'll make that a practice of ours, that you'll get the notes and we'll, at the beginning of each meeting, vote to approve their contents and solicit your edits to whatever was written before that meeting, so that the voting is on what we've all worked on together in terms of the notes. For voting, is there any thought on the best way to capture that? Is it just I call for a vote and there's a raise of hands, or verbal speaking of yes or no?
Rosa?
Yep.
I just wanted to add something before we address that, to what Abigail said. I agree with what Abigail said, but I just do want to add just one nuance, that there are different needs based on region, that some communities are densely populated, that some places in the state are, what we call Indian country, that other places are rural. And we are exposed to different kinds of threats, depending on whether we're waterfront or whether we're inside, in the middle of the state. So I think that while that doesn't have to be included in the definition, I do think that being able to look at place in terms of defining what the challenges and threats are is also important. It doesn't define what a disadvantaged community is, but it definitely is something that that is important, because in New York City, when we have waterfront communities, we have to deal with extreme wind, heat, and storm surge. That may not be the challenge for a rural community. They may have other kinds of challenges like landslides and things of that sort. But that kind of granular look, I think, is necessary in order to address the needs of communities that are frontline communities that are threatened by climate change. So I just wanted to flag that.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, Emma, for capturing all of this on the screen for us. I think we can have our first vote on how are we going to vote for our process. So I'd like to hear yays or nays on the idea of voting and the idea of the majority carrying the vote. And so I'm trying to remember how many of this there are, the majority being more than half of the membership.
Rosa, can I just make a quick point before we get to this process? Yes, I think that both what Elizabeth and Abigail were talking about are so critical. It has to be a both and, in particular, again, considerations for why we work with frontline communities that have a lot of these solutions, and many of us are doing place-based work. And then the maps that you sent last time, I did, haven't done a ton of analyzing, but some of the initial sort of things that went through my head is looking at the HUD maps in particular. Those maps made zero sense to me. They had, what would be considered a disadvantaged community are places where it's literally some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city of Buffalo. Other neighborhoods, for whatever reason, that I felt definitely would fit into what we would define as a disadvantaged community, lacking resources and all kinds of other things, were not on those maps. So I would just say, being very careful not to put so much priority on using those maps that were sent.
Okay, thank you, Rowan. Those maps I think you're referring to are from the interim approach.
Yeah,
I think that might be the maps we shared. Okay, thank you. And Emma just reminded me that there is a polling option on the WebEx. So that could be a way that we capture our voting as well. Okay, thank you. I didn't hear any nays on the majority vote issue. And I agree, Eddie. I'm not sure how to use the polling option, so Emma and I will have a sidebar, and she'll show me how to do it so we can use it in our meetings.
I did want to jump in if the vote is official now, with the lack of nays. Maybe we need yays as well. I feel like verbal yays are a good thing sometimes.
Yeah, verbal yays. Verbal type, because I'm getting a few types. Thanks.
I did want to just come back to this and say a couple of things. One is that this is exactly kind of what I wanted us to go through as an exercise to really show that knowing that many of you had worked on that legislation, that there was a lot of thought that went into that. There's still a lot that we're bringing to this, and so it's really important to be thinking and keeping this top of mind that we're coming from so many different perspectives, as is designed, but that we need to be trying toward a North Star of something. And so what we will do, what I'd like to propose to Rosa is Amanda and I can kind of collate these notes and try to come up with something that then we'll hand out to you all and build on, because I do think in addition to the rubric, this is something that we should continue to talk through and think through, and then we can use one of those polls to vote on it at some point, maybe.
That sounds great, Alex. I just there was one other person in the stack, I believe, you wanted to add.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight part of the definition that's not explicitly written in there, but I feel like it is covered, which is, the first thing I think of is for disadvantaged communities or communities that have experienced both a disinvestment and non-investment over the decades due to systematic institutional racism. So I think NYCHA is more of what I would consider, and this is an oversimplification, of course, as kind of a disinvestment over time versus, when we think about redlining, there's a lot of communities that experience non-investment, and we're seeing the effects of that. So I would just wanted to kind of highlight those two categories of disadvantaged communities.
Great, thanks. And Eddie.
Yeah, I was wondering, and if this already happened in a previous call, forgive me. It's my age is showing. But I thought I remember speaking with some of the members of the committee and folks expressing desire to have someone from the California Environmental from the Cal Enviro screen, both someone on the government side and maybe one of the EJ activists that had worked with Cal Enviro screen and clearly have their own perspective on how useful their indicator, their toolbox has been. Would that be possible to try to organize for our next call or a call? Because I think that a lot of us have a sense of and we're getting closer to, I think, figuring out how to kind of mix and match the criteria and the indicators, right? But it might be really helpful to have both the practitioners, both from the government and the advocate side, on a future call to kind of give us a real world, some real world feedback on lessons learned, if you will.
Yes, thank you, Eddie, for that reminder. That is definitely something that we'll try to organize for this group. I think it would also help us, as you said, navigate what we are trying to do with indicators and operationalizing them. Great, so I'm gonna turn it back to Amanda. I think we're gonna go through that draft rubric. Thank you again for going through and telling us your priorities for the definition of disadvantaged communities. So Emma, I think the slide is slide 16, where we start for the rubric.
I'm not seeing. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
I think it's coming up. Yep.
Okay. So the Word document that you saw had a draft rubric in it that is really meant to, we can go to the next slide actually. The rubric would be used to screen those disadvantaged community indicators and data to identify the highest priority and best candidates for inclusion in the DAC definition. So really come up with that, initial screening list of really we think these are worth, these indicators do what you want to do. They are our best way to represent the concepts and the definition you're trying to represent, and that it's worth going to track down the data on them and see how well they work in a scoring system or definition. And also, just the process of putting each of the proposed indicators through a rubric, really documenting it, provides systematic way to evaluate things, and also documentation of what was important and what kind of fell out and was lower priority, which could be helpful as other stakeholders review this, and as you get public comments, maybe questioning, why wasn't this included? And it might be something that, you considered, but fell out of the rubric as slightly lower priority. So let's go on to slide 13. Sorry, one more slide. Right, so in the document that you saw, the rubric was really broken into 4 parts to try to capture a couple of different things. The first 2 pieces, A and B, were about the relevance and applicability of each indicator to the CLCPA objectives and really to your definition of what the disadvantaged community means. So what are some rules you can put in place and apply to each indicator to figure out how well it captures your and the legislation's idea of criteria for a definition community? So that's A and B. We'll look at these in detail in a second. And then the last 2 pieces, the last 2 buckets, C and D, were really about the data availability, sufficiency, and quality. So what data is available, and really how well that data fits or represents what you want it to represent. There might be different indicators that, you know, some might be a direct representation and really exactly measure the thing you want to measure, and some might be an indirect representation. So we can look at this, and I know we won't have time to get through all of this, but this first piece was really an attempt to actually break apart or take apart some of the pieces of that written criteria, those 3 pillars, what I call pillars, areas burdened by those things mentioned. And really for each indicator, we were assuming that each indicator could probably be associated with one of the pillars. It might fall in multiple buckets, but most of them could probably kind of be screened as addressing one pillar. On what are some specific rules we could ask of that indicator to see how well it meets the criteria in the CLCPA language. So I know we don't have that much time, but we would love to hear any thoughts on either this language or just the idea of having a rubric that tries to apply the CLCPA language.
I could start. I mean, I think thanks for this. I mean, we can't do indicators or identify criteria to apply to them without referencing the law. So we're kind of stuck with that, right? Which is not a bad thing. But to be candid, like if this was available to us before the meeting, it's my fault I didn't get a chance to look at it. But if it wasn't, I need some time, frankly, to just absorb this. I don't know if others had a chance to review this and have some initial feedback to give. I mean, following the law, great. Beyond that, I'm not sure where this is going to lead us to. So I'll stop there.
Was this sent to us in advance? Did I miss something?
Yeah, it was sent in advance, but I think, it's my apologies. It wasn't sent very far in advance. So you would have seen it in the SharePoint and emailed to you. I think it was yesterday.
So I just have to say, that those of us that work for environmental justice, climate justice communities, if you really want our engagement, I think you're going to have to respect our time and give this information to us with enough time so that we could review it, consult with each other, and give you meaningful responses to this. Because this really then starts feeling like we are being rushed into something that is really important to our communities, and that we don't really have an opportunity to reflect on it and give really meaningful thought and responses. It is, I know that's how governance works, but it really needs to change. That's just unacceptable for us to get these things at the last minute, because we get hundreds of emails a day and we're combing through them and we sit on a lot of different bodies. So I would really ask that you do that, because I'm looking at this and I feel like I'm working it through while we're in the middle of a meeting with each other. And this would be the time for us to be able to recommend and give our responses instead of working it through. So please be mindful about our needs as people that are leaders in the EJCJ community.
Definitely. And what we wanted to do was sort of preview, because we knew that by the time we got it together, you weren't going to have enough time to sit with it. So we wanted to preview the document that you got in the email, and then we're going to work through it offline with you and then have it for a broader discussion at the December 16th meeting.
I understand, Rosa,
Yeah.
but with all due respect, and I really don't mean any disrespect to you, you know how I feel about you. We are now in December, at the beginning of December, and this process is moving really quickly, and we are still at the beginning of stuff. So to be able to use our time in a way that is most meaningful and effective so that we can move the dial, we're going to need to get because we're literally in December. So anyway, I just want to say that. I don't want to kill a dead horse.
I'm agreeing with you on getting things to you early. And this was sent late, and that's why we said, let's just preview it. We wanted you to be able to see why we sent you that document yesterday, not that we expected you to be able to speak to and give recommendations at this point. It's really more of a preview because we knew we sent the
Well, thank
document
you.
very late.
No worries. Thank you, though.
And we're trying to be better about making sure that the PowerPoints are sent ahead of time with enough time for you to engage with them. So thank you for keeping the pressure on us to make sure that we're maximizing the use of your very valuable time.
Thank you.
So I think, Amanda, maybe let's go through the rest of the preview.
Sure.
With the next slide.
So then the next slide is also tied to the legislation and tied to, meant to be, or could be tied to the benefits and investments mandate, which talks about clean energy and energy efficiency investments in certain areas. So it could be an opportunity to say whether an indicator represents exposures, risks, threats, or vulnerabilities that are potentially actionable, which may be difficult to determine, but an idea, or something that could be addressed through clean energy or energy efficiency investments. So, is this something that is kind of is in the purview of some of the strategies that the CLPCA is developing? And we can go to the next slide. And so these next two buckets are more about how well does this data and this indicator fit the purposes you want to use it for? So how well does it represent what you want it to represent? Is it a direct representation, like a measurement of something like air pollution, or perhaps a proxy measure, like an effect of something? And just a way, thinking that maybe a direct measurement in some cases, if you have the choice between a direct and indirect measurement, if the data is good for the direct measurement, that could be preferable. And then the second one is a little bit tricky because we're going to be weighing all these indicators together. How essential or unique is it? And I don't know about the word essential, but to me, the idea of being unique is something like it represents something that other indicators don't represent. So it's less highly correlated with other indicators. For example, if you're going to have income or some measure of income as a core measure, and then there's other indicators that are proposed or that are very highly correlated with income, does that other measure contribute something unique, or could perhaps income be representative of that idea? With the ideas we discussed earlier, we do want to, we don't have an exact number. I don't know of a magic number for how many indicators or metrics should be in here, but the idea in general that as we add more, each one already in there starts to be watered down and count for a little bit less. So how do we get to those things that really represent unique aspects you're trying to capture? And then the next and final bucket on the next slide is about the data sufficiency and quality. So even if there's an indicator or a metric that looks like it's a really good fit, it really matches and addresses the legislation, it looks like it's really representing what you want it to represent, it might be that might be poor quality data for it. So some check in the system to say, is this data, for example, available statewide? If there is, a geographic definition, is it available at the geographic level needed statewide? What is if there is anything written or any expert opinions on its accuracy or measurement error, what do we know about how accurate that data is? Did it come from a small sample? Did it come from non-representative models? How old is it? And then, given our timeline here, is it something that could be provided or made available within the timeline needed? So I'm seeing something in the chat here. Let me just expand to see. Jared, do you want to talk about your question?
Sure. I mean, it's more of a recommendation or suggestion that it would just be helpful for me to go through this exercise with one of the indicators that we're seriously considering or has been used, let's say with the count virus screen, just as a dry run to see like how the discussion takes place, what details and nuances kind of emerge or come out of that process, so that when we really get to this in the future, it can be streamlined, it can be efficient, know how it works, and we can use our time more effectively and efficiently in future meetings. And I don't have a suggestion or a solution of when that would be. Is it the next meeting, or is it a meeting that we hold offline and Amanda, you join us or something like that? But I'm just, kind of kicking that idea around.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. That's valuable for, not just getting us on the same page, but also just making sure before we agree to and implement this rubric that it actually works. That I agree with the idea of finding something that you think really is key and really is valuable. What happens when we put that through the rubric? And I don't have a process suggestion.
Right. I think that's also an excellent idea. And maybe what we can do to wrap up today is we'll resend the draft rubric. Maybe we'll put some more questions in the body of the email, but we definitely want the members to sit with it and engage with it. And then maybe Amanda, we could give an example in running something through it also. Through email and prepare it for the next session to talk it through how we went through each one. But I think we can use one of the indicators from either CalEnviro or EPA EJ screen as just an example of what the process would look like running through.
Great idea.
Great. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Just for the record, I'm not suggesting that we have another meeting, because I know people's time is valuable, and I don't want it to become onerous or burdensome to try and schedule another meeting outside of the official meetings, but I'm not sure what the best solution for that is.
Sure, I was thinking more of we would send to you all an example of how it will look on paper with an indicator just for show. And then at our next meeting, which is December 16th, we could step through it live as well, so that we're all seeing how it would work if we kept the rubric exactly this way. I also will say, if you have the time to look through the rubric, and if you see anything that jumps out at you that you want us to change that isn't working as part of the evaluation process, please let us know that. But again, we're going to follow up with you with next steps, so that you have the document with you again, and that that for next meeting, these are the things we're going to want to talk about. And just another thing, thank you for your engagement with those advisory panels. We do have other advisory panels who we'd like to engage with, and we're organizing with them for when they can come talk to us. And some of them are available to come on December 16th, so that we can continue that early engagement process that I think they found, and I hope you found, to be very valuable. Okay, any last thoughts before we log off? All right, hearing none, thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the weekend. We'll be back together on December 16th, 1 p.m.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.